Well, I have an update on my truck over there, and the keen observant folks in the crowd are gonna know that it's not a positive one based on the fact that it's on the trailer behind my dad's truck. In my dad's trailer. I sure am glad my dad has trucks and trailers, because it would be really hard to get that 6,000 pound truck back to my house from 25 minutes yonderward. Anyway, so the repairs that we did over the weekend to my leaks and stuff, and working on the valves, all that seemed to go really well, because the truck was running really good. It started right up a lot better than it did before. There was no shaky shakes anymore. It was super smooth, and it just ran really nice, and everything was just felt like it was all factory fresh, good as new again. And we drove it around for, I don't know, probably put an hour, 30 miles on it, and everything was great. And then I drove it to work, and it just isn't having that anymore. So I'm going down the highway, everything's cool. I'm going at like 65 miles an hour for, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, after driving all through the woods, because that's where we live. We live in the woods. But everything was really smooth and nice and wonderful, and then all of a sudden, while we're pulling up a hill, I hear a bunch of knocking noises, like the engine's knocking on heaven's door. And then, and then I looked down at the oil pressure gauge, and it was at none of the oil pressure. So I slow down and we pull over, and about the time I stopped it, the pressure gauge popped right back up to normal. Good to go. The noise didn't go away though. Anywho, it's about time to get it off the trailer. Well, it doesn't sound that bad right now. We noticed that when we were loading it on the trailer too. When I had stopped, it was just a ringing, hard, knocking, all sorts of noise, really bad. But after it sat there all day, and then we went to load it up, and like just now when I unloaded it, when it started, it was really bad knocking for a minute, and then it quieted up a good bit, and then didn't sound too bad. So our first course of action is going to be bring it back in the shop again, and we're going to drain out all the new oil that we just put in it, and get the oil pan off the motor, kind of hook our peepers in there and see what all the bearings look like, and put an oil pump in it. And we'll just try that first before we go just snatching the motor out. Now I got the shop all reorganized around being able to work on this and close everything up. So the first step in our process of finding out how bad messed up the 302 in this truck is after what seems like really low oil pressure and then lots of the low end thuddy thud thud noises. Probably a bunch of main bearing knockage, because it all sounded like it was under the oil and it was real, you know, deep tone, not a higher pitched tone like a rod knock. Anyway, we got us an oil pan here, and I cleaned it up real good with some dish soap and rags, and we're gonna drain my fresh new oil change that I just put in here a few days ago, drain it out into that pan and see just how full of the metallic specks that it is. Hopefully there's not too many. We got a new oil pump. We're gonna, if the bottom of the motor doesn't look too terrible, we're gonna go ahead and put that oil pump in, which is probably not gonna be fun because we need to get the pan off, and there's not a lot of room down there. There's a big cross member you can't see because this other plate's in the way, but there's a big cross member that comes under. There's not a lot of clearance between the oil pan and that. So we'll see if I can get the pan off without lifting the motor, but I think I'm probably going to have to undo a transmission mount and the engine mounts, take a few things loose that don't have a lot of room to stretch, get the old cherry picker over here rolled up in place, and we're probably going to have to lift up on the motor a ways to get the oil pan off. But after we get that far, we're going to see what the bottom end looks like and how bad the bearings are, if anything's like real obviously all squished out and damaged. And if everything looks not too horrible under there, we'll just put an oil pump back in it and a new fresh oil change and see how it sounds. Well, that oil is full of bearing material. There's even some sizable solid chunks down there. So, we've pulled the hood. I started getting some things loose. The radiator's out. Lots of room for activities. We're going to move forward with taking the motor mounts and the transmission mount loose, lifting the motor up, pulling the pan off, and then from there we'll think about maybe putting some bearings in the bottom end and trying to go with that. I don't know, we'll see how bad the damage is. It's looking more and more like that engine's going to have to come out, and we're going to have to completely disassemble and rebuild it. Yay, at least it'll be new then. Sure looks nice under here. See my color coordination? You got the silver and the blue. Yay. Look, the coil's even blue too. Alright. This is where we are at the moment with no hood and radiator and stuff. Now I'm gonna pull this intake plenum because it's in the way of one of my lifty points to pick up on the motor to get the oil pan off. But at least it'll also give me a lot more clearance to lift on it too, so that's nice. Then after I get that pulled, I'll start removing lots of other cables and harnesses and stuff that's going to get pulled on when I go lifting. Alright, moving along here. I've got all my lines unhooked from the throttle body. There's a coolant line here. There's a coolant line there. And then the EGR emissions something or another that's probably going to get deleted on, unhooked over there. Then I got all my vacuum lines loose from the big T. See, there's a vacuum line, there's a vacuum line, there's some more vacuum lines, there's some vacuum lines, all those hooked there. And down here on the fuel rail, I've got, or next to the fuel rail, I've got all the vacuum lines and plugs undone from my ignition thing. There's the ignition coil and it's got those guys next to it. Still need to learn what all those do. Probably don't need those either. Then I've got 5 of my 6 manifold bolts broke loose. Now we're going to go back in there the same janky manner with the T40 bit in the driver, in the other driver, in the adapter, in the other driver on the ratchet, because I just still haven't found a Torx bit set with long guys, because they don't want you to own that type of tool. Anyway, now we'll move forward and get that bolt loose and the little brackety bolt on the side loose, and then we'll just pull it out. Now we've got access to our other lifty point, and it looks like my gasket made a fine seal before. See, I actually had to split the gasket in half to get it off of there. So that'll be fun to clean off and do again. Alright. Got a bunch more electrical things unplugged this whole side of the harness, so I got more stretchy room when we go lifty lift in. And on the underside, next we get to come down here and take the bolts loose from the end of this pipe where it goes to the manifold, and this side also, which will be especially fun. Right up there. You can't see it, me neither, don't worry about it. We gotta get those 4 bolts loose. Probably break at least 3 of them. And right off the side of this big center support guy is this big piece of metal which has the motor mount attached to it. See this one singular bolt here? I think when that nut comes off it can slide up out of the mount. So we gotta take those nuts loose on both sides. See, old cracked up rubber mount. Hopefully this nut will spin and the bolt doesn't just spin in the mount. We'll see. After literal hours of struggling, I finally got the 4 nuts loose that hold these pipes up to the exhaust manifold, so now that's loose. I had to take this heat shield off to get to these bolts up here on that pipe. That is the absolute worst part of all this. On the other side there, those were pretty easy to get loose. Somehow we don't have a broken bolt yet. Got all my linkage loose from the transmission, and then way over here at the other side of this big long pipe I have it loose from that cherry bomb thing. So maybe now we can get this whole giant Y pipe catalytic converter thing out from under the truck somehow. But yeah, we sure didn't need to break in it anywhere else in this like 6 feet of pipe here. No, this is plenty of room. Alright, so this is where we are. You see we've got the big Y pipe thing completely removed out. I just had to lift up on the front right corner of the truck here. I've got my wires taken loose from the starter because they travel down through that center core support big metal thing. So they loop around to the starter, so they would get hung if I lifted up far enough. And we have the bolts in the engine mounts, or the nuts, pulled which is really nice because the rubber looks pretty cracked up there, but the bolt didn't spin, the nut came off. And back here on the big transmission mount, I have the bolts pulled from each side of it. That way it can tiltulate and slide a little bit if it has to. We're going for no sliding though, I believe. I think that's the way we want to go. It looks pretty good here now with the exhaust out of the way on the oil pan. Like, I bet I could get it dropped down without lifting the motor, but it looks like it wouldn't be coming off. So I think our next move from here... Oh, also I've got the all the linkages and stuff loose from the side of the transmission on this frame rail over here. See that piece of metal right there? That has my fuel lines on it. I took it loose from the frame rail, and I took its clips a few places back loose from the frame rail. So I have a lot of wiggle room on my fuel lines now. So it looks like I shouldn't have to mess with my clips, the easy quick clips that are such a pain to disconnect. I should have plenty of room. I can just leave that all hooked up and lift up and do my business and put it back down. I've already come over with the engine hoist and hooked up. See, I've got my chain here and I'm all bolted into my two lifty points, but I had a problem. Probably should have left it here to show you, but anyway, when I have it all the way over, I'm not pulling straight up on the motor, I'm pulling a little bit forward. And with me doing all this by myself, I think that's going to make it real hard to set it back down in place. Like, I'm pretty sure it'll come right up, but then it's going to go forward. And how do you put it back? When you go back down, I got to like push all that weight backwards while it gets just, we're not going to be able to do that. So my options were, see, I've got her in the 1 ton slot. I could slide it forward to the 1/2 ton slot, and then that would get me way plenty far out there, but this is a pretty sizable engine and transmission, and I have all the stuff mounted to the front of it, and I'm just worried that's going to weigh more than 1/2 ton. So we're going to go ahead and pull the front bumper and probably the grill or whatever else we need to do, so I can leave it in the 1 ton slot and have more straighty overage, so the engine lifts straight up instead of up and forward. So yeah, now let's do that. Now we got a few things removed for clearance. We can get the ram much closer, and our chain's looking pretty straight up and down now. So maybe when I go to set it back down, she might just drop right back in place, right where we need it to go. Probably not, but you never know. Before, when it was pulling forward, it definitely wouldn't drop right back in, so we got better chances now. So now we need to go ahead and start real slowly lifting up on everything and seeing if it all lifts up freely and what all I forgot to unhook. Because the jack, she tells you what you forgot to unhook. Actually, she just breaks it. But you know. Things are just dripping. Like they don't even care. Anyway, you may be able to tell we got a lot more space under the oil pan now. So the next thing we'll do is get down there and figure out what kind of blocking or something maybe I could put in there as a fail-safety in case the ram starts to leak down, so it doesn't like crush what I'm doing. So I had to jack the engine up quite a bit higher, and then I was able to get the oil pan up. I dumped a bunch of the stuff out of it into that pan down there, and then I could get it on a full 90-degree sideways and slip it out in that space there. And If you'll notice where I poured the oil out of it to the side, a whole bunch of metal chunkage came out with it. And this is what's left in the pan. So that would appear to be like every single one of the bearings on the bottom end, I think. So that's good. Now here's what it looks like from underneath. You'll see my pickup screen here is just completely, I don't know if it'll focus on it, but it is completely clogged with all that stuff. So I think now the next thing we're going to do is pull a few of these, pull a cap off and maybe pull a main cap off and try to see how gouged up everything is. So I got one of my rod bearings pulled out here. I don't know that you can see it very good. Anyway, it's like number 8. This one is all the way at the back of the motor, and it's got some heavy scarring from all the stuff that was in the oil when whatever grenaded. So I'm gonna start looking through a few different caps, I guess maybe more towards the front now, and check out what it looks like under some mains and try to figure out where all that metal came from. Because this thing's heavily scarred from the metal, but this bearing is still here, so... What are you? I'm assuming that's bearing. I just gotta figure out like where it came from. Either that or it's piston. I don't know. Sure sounds like bottom end knock that it had though. Now we're getting closer to where all the metal came from. If we can zoom and whatever. Focus. Focus you something. Yeah, I guess the shine is messing with us, but anyway, there's a lot of metal missing from the surface of this bearing. But there is a bearing here still, so it wasn't cap on crank, so that's good. Of course, we still need to dig out that upper bearing and see how chooched it is, because that's a lot of metal. And so far it's looking like 2 rods. If you'll notice, you'll see all these rods look a particular way. You see that bronzy brown oily color in there on number 8, number 7, number 6, number 5. What is going on at number 4 and 3? And if I can get you up over here, there's 1 and 2. See their smooth bronzy color? But these two just look gray. Looks like the reason for that is because that's where a lot of the bearing material came from. See how it just looks gray all around it? Like it was just turned into powder. Yeah, but that crank appears to be chewed up pretty nice right here. So we'll pull the other cap off quick, and probably this main too, just to see what that bearing looks like. So far it seems like all our metal came from right here at number 3 and 4 rod bearing. But yeah, it looks like that bearing started to cheech and then it completely clogged off this oil passage. So she got hot. So now, here we are a few days later. Now that we've lifted up on the motor and verified things are good and frigged up down there and we can't just throw some bearings and a pump in it and carry on for a minute, we set the engine back down, which was really fun for me, by the way. The engine hoist over there is my dad's. I've never really been able to lift a whole drivetrain up and down, So that was pretty scary, getting it all up in the air and fixing it in place and going under it and stuff. But what was really cool was setting the thing back down. Like I told y'all earlier, I took the bumper and stuff off so we was at a better angle, and it was just the smoothest thing. I eased it down on the hoist, and then I was able just to give it a little push backwards and set it right down on top of the engine mounts, which was just made me feel so special. So now that broke motor is sitting back down on the mounts. In the near future, we'll be pulling all that back out and rebuilding the motor, stripping it all the way down to nothing. I got these cool little caster wheels from Lowe's today that support a bunch of weight. I'm going to make a little cart to set the transmission on so we can slide it all around out of the way easy without hurting ourselves. But anyway, right now, because that's as broke as it is, we're going to move over to this truck because it runs and drives good for now, and we're going to fix up the front end because all this thing needs to be safe on the road. It's even registered and insured and all that fancy stuff. All it needs to be safe is these kingpin bushings up here in the front, right up in there. This is like the equivalent of ball joints on most other people's stuff. There's a big rod in here, and there's some bushings in the steering knuckle up top and down low, and those bushings are really wore out, and this thing slops back and forth, which makes it particularly dangerous anywhere above like 15 miles an hour. But we've got to take care of that and throw some wheel cylinders in the back and go over our brakes, and then this thing would be safe and ready for me to drive to work. So this is going to be a pretty fun process. See, I've already got started here. Got the caliper removed, strung up out of the way. I've got this bolt loose so the spring is free to fall down when we get the rest of this assembly down. All we're doing now is the big nut on the back of that radius arm, which I just got to break loose, which is super special because all this stuff is a little old. And underneath this way, at the other end of this big I-beam guy, we're taking that nut and bolt loose to drop this completely out of the truck frame, just like we did on the crash repair. But I have to let you know that I was extra super shocked while I was taking shocked. I was extra super shocked while I was taking stuff apart. You notice how this isn't cut? That nut actually came loose and unthreaded without me having to put vice grips on it or anything, and it just was really nice and smooth. And the last person to put shocks on this truck was my dad, which was about 20 years ago. So that was pretty neat that came loose. Anywho, now we're going to move forward. I just got that nut broke loose, so now we get to go under and get that stuff loose, and then we can set this down. But for right now, let me show you my suspension upgrades we're doing. You see the old 40-year-old spring here? These are the original springs from that truck, which has the garbage stupid springs in it still. You may remember from the rebuild video, those springs suck. Anyway, these are the original springs from that 92, and that truck is a lot heavier than this truck, and also these springs have 11 less years of wear on them. So I'm thinking when I drop this down and I have to take this nut loose from all of this anyway, I'll go ahead and take these springs off and pop those springs in, which are still old as could be, but I bet it's going to sit up a lot better, maybe even close to the stock ride height again, just because these are made for a much heavier truck. That thing weighs a little over 1,000 pounds more than this truck, it being the whole extended cab and all that, big heavy guy. So yeah, excited about that. That should be nice. That's like a free suspension upgrade, and that's why you don't throw things away. I also had this in mind when I removed those springs. I had that exact thought that those needed to go on this truck.